Hello, I'm James Henry, and this is The Message.
The Message.
Well, good morning. I'm James Henry. I'm the pastor of St. James, and I'm bringing the message today. And of course, we're talking about transitions, because transitions are what life really is all about. I mean, if you think about it for just a moment, everything in life is kind of a transition, which makes transitions seem like they ought to be easier if you're doing them all the time. I mean, you transition from not existing to existing in the womb, from existing in the womb and the warmth of the water to out in the cold, hard reality of life outside the womb. And we grow up, from being at the mercy of other people for when you're going to get to eat and when you're going to get to sleep and when you're going to get your diaper changed to being able to do all your own stuff, to growing up, all these transitions from relationships. Some you choose for yourself, some you don't choose for yourself. What do we do with all of these transitions? Well, Ecclesiastes, the writer of Ecclesiastes, wants us to know that in life there's a time for everything. There is a time for every purpose under heaven and a season. And we pass through those in and out throughout a lifetime. So how do we prepare ourselves to face the challenges that lay before us? Because quite frankly, they are challenging. When you can expect a transition, even when you can expect a transition. Last week I said to you that life is messy and that life is filled with challenges. Well, transitions are those kinds of things that no matter how much you prepare for them, you're not ready when they come, even the ones you prepare for. Think about it. I know people who know that someone they love deeply is in the process of dying. And yet when it finally happens, even if there might be some sense of release and peace, there is all over again the deep pain that comes back to visit, because it's finally happened. Or what about those surprising things where you're in a relationship and the person you're in a relationship with dies or leaves or decides they're not interested in you anymore or moves to the far side of the country and you're not moving with them and you're trying to figure out how to work those things out. Those kinds of transitions are about negotiation, figuring out in your life how do you make all these pieces come together in a way that forms a tapestry of your life and that perhaps causes the least amount of anxiety and challenge and frustration for you. Well, I think the beginning of dealing with things that come your way is just what Ecclesiastes says in such a matter-of-fact way that we miss right over it, and that is that we skip right over it, and that is that life happens. Things change. Relationships change. You change. There was a time in my life where I could, take one piece of food out of my diet and lose 10 pounds. Now I can fast for 10 weeks and I still weigh the same thing. Perhaps I've gained weight because I smelled something that tasted really good. I imagined tasted really good. My body doesn't work. I mean, that's a transition that just happened over time. I woke up one day and suddenly I wasn't able to lift as much weight as I used to be able to. Or I feel aches and pains in my left shoulder. For a while it was my right shoulder. Now the right shoulder is great. Now the left shoulder stinks. I don't know what the deal is. It just is part of the transition of living. And life is a constant transition. So if we accept that things are going to happen, it makes it a little bit easier. Life is difficult. Immediately, if you assume that life is full of transitions, then the transitions become just a little bit, at least anticipated. Maybe not easier, but you anticipate something's going to change today. My plan is that I'm going for a long walk. And the weather's plan is that the sky is going to drop out and 7 million tons of water, which California is begging for. If there were some way we could just send this across the continent, those Californians would love us forever. I can't tell you how many times in the last week we've gotten flash flood warnings in Alexandria because, why? There was going to be a deluge. I began to think that perhaps if God would be speaking at my ear in any moment, and despite my lack of carpentry skills, I might be building the ark in my backyard. But that hasn't happened yet, so since God hasn't called that, I guess I won't. But the truth is, if everything is changing and it's always changing all the time, why is it that it always frustrates us that it is? And it's because we're human. It's because we'd like to be in control. Can we just be honest with each other? Control issues are one of the major things in the world. Why do we hate traffic? I had a conversation last night with a gentleman about traffic in Northern Virginia. He came from somewhere else, and he came here, and he was just like, I hate coming here because I hate the traffic. A transition from country roads. You know what I love in my life? I live here all the time, but periodically I go to West Virginia to our cabin. Guess what? There's none of over in West Virginia that we have ever experienced. Traffic. You know what traffic is? You get behind a tractor for a little ways. You know what? I can live with a tractor. At least we're moving at 3 miles an hour, and I know we're going to keep moving at 3 miles an hour until the tractor turns off. I want to have control in my life, but the problem with transitions are they always make us feel like we're out of control. And we can say things like, and religious people are good at saying, well, God is in control. Well, sometimes it doesn't seem like that at all. If God were in control, don't you think things would be neat? God would look at the world and say, you know what, I think those Virginians have gotten plenty of rain. I'm moving the clouds on the other side. I'm moving them back over there to California because those people are having a massive drought. They need a ton of water. But that's not how it works. I want control. I want God to be in control, and I want God to be in control in a way that I can understand and completely accept. But life is not like that. There's a time for everything. There's a time to be born and a time to die. There's a time to dance, a time to refrain from dancing, a time to throw stones, a time to gather the stones together. Come on, could there be any more opposites? There are times when I'm in control. Albeit it's a very brief period, followed by periods when I'm completely out of control. And perhaps this is all a wonderful lesson about life that God wants us to learn. You are not in control. You don't get to choose what happens next, whether it's going to rain outside or not. You can choose to ignore the rain when it comes down. You don't get to choose that. In all honesty, you don't get to choose whether you live for the next 15 minutes or not. You just might give up the ghost here. Please don't, not during worship. Please go and do it somewhere where it's neat. Because I'm preaching right now and I don't wish to be interrupted. But because I want to be in control. See, wasn't that a nice, yeah, my wife's right in the front row saying, ouch. The truth is, it's all, control is an illusion. You can make some choices in life. That's part of being human. You can make good choices, you can make bad choices. It's all about your free will. But in the end, some things are going to happen that you're going to have to learn to roll with the punches when they happen. That's where that whole roll with the punches kind of image comes from. Challenges are coming. Ecclesiastes says, sometimes things are going to be dance, and sometimes you're not going to dance. Sometimes people are going to die. Sometimes people are going to be born. Sometimes you're going to be at war. Sometimes you're going to be at peace. Sometimes, apparently, even according to Ecclesiastes, there's a time to kill. And there's a time to refrain from killing. There are all these kinds of times that most of the time I don't want to say we're completely oblivious to, but we just have to live with. Life is a constant set of transitions. If I were to read to you the whole book of Ecclesiastes, I've spent a couple of different times reading Ecclesiastes because it can feel like it's a downer book. If you ever want to read a kind of a downer book, it's like everything is vanity. You eat some food and then you die. You work really hard, and then you eat some food, and then you die. So you might as well work really hard, eat some food, enjoy it, because you're going to die. Thanks a lot. But in the middle, there's this little piece that is famous to us because the Byrds sang the song Turn, Turn, Turn in the 60s. And guess what we're singing? It's our final song today. We're going to sing that song so you can internalize all the words of this passage. So that perhaps if you begin to know inside yourself, first of all, you can't control everything. And second of all, the change in transition is going to happen. And third of all, that the best way to deal with it. Have you ever shook your fists at the lightning storm because you wanted to be outside doing something? Did it change the lightning storm? Did it really make you feel any better? Okay, amazingly, occasional, sometimes it made you feel better. Did giving any special signs when you were driving in traffic to your neighbor who cut you off, any special, related signs, did that really make you feel any better? Did it give you more control over the situation? It let out a moment of your frustration. But did it really change? Sometimes shaking our fist at the wind is just that, shaking fist at the wind. So James, this is really a downer sermon. You chose Ecclesiastes. It's a downer. Everything is vanity. It's pointless. What are you saying to us, James? I'm saying if we can already assume that everything changes, nothing stays the same. But we can also know that behind all those changes, there is a God who is with us in those changes. If we can recognize when the worst thing we could have imagined happens, and oftentimes the worst thing that happens to us is beyond our imagining, and that's what makes it even worse. We never thought that, whatever that is, would happen to us, would go on in our lives. When that happens, whatever that is, God is right there with you in the midst of that. So start practicing that presence now. Do you know people that have waited until something terrible happens in their lives and then they try to negotiate a deal with God? You know, God, if you'll only get me through this, if you'll only get my friend through this, if you'll only get my relative through this, if you will only get me through this, if you will only get the world through this, if you'll only get my country through this, if you'll only get my church through this, then I will serve you forever. Usually a deal that we don't follow through with. But it seems like a nice negotiating tool. But the truth is, if we start practicing the presence right now, then maybe when the change happens, the transition happens, when the cutoff in traffic happens, we're not in any more control than we were, but our attitude is different about it. How often do you in your daytime take a moment out just to take a few deep breaths and to thank God that you're alive? Instead of giving special signs or saying special words to people who cut us off in traffic, what if, especially if there's no accident involved, because you were able to slam on your brakes quickly enough, what if instead in that moment you just took a deep breath and said, thank you, God, no one was hurt in this instant. Yeah, my pride was bruised a little bit. I really judged that person who cut me off in traffic. They're probably having just as bad a day as I am, and they took it out on me by cutting me off in traffic. What would it look like if we let those things go? Well, you don't let them go just by accident one day. You start practicing letting them go. If somebody reaches across the table when you're eating with them and they take the salt first, and you were going for the salt, do you pull out a weapon and shoot them so you can have the salt? No. You let them shake the salt, and then you take the salt, you ask for it, they pass it to you, you use the salt. Perhaps you're at a table with a large group of people and the salt's way down there. It's going to get to you eventually. But if you learn in those simple moments, when we let our frustration boil over something simple, if you learn in those moments to just take a deep breath, to give thanks to God that you're at the table with somebody that you want to be at the table with, to give thanks that you're alive, that you weren't hurt by someone taking your salt or pepper. If you take a deep breath and you practice that in the simple moments of life, when it's the gathering stone together moment, then when it's the time to throw away the stones, you'll be okay. If you can practice that sense when you're in the dance, when there's a moment to refrain from dancing, you'll be okay. If you can practice that in moments when you laugh, Perhaps you'll be able to practice it also in moments when you mourn. There is a time for all these things in life. They are going to happen. You cannot stop them. The miracle of modern medicine is not going to keep you alive forever. And I'm not sure you really want to be kept alive forever. The preciousness of life is partially because it is finite. The joy of living, isn't your life too short already to spend it frustrated with the lack of control? Perhaps in the moments of craziness in your life, you can develop a mantra. I let go of my desire for control and power. I let go of my desire for esteem and affection, for everybody to pat me on the back and say how good I am. I let go of my desire to be self-sufficient, to stand on my own. I let go of my desire to control every situation. And maybe if you let go of that, in the moment you can control, great. Oh, I got a great email, I can type a response, and the internet still works, and it goes back out. Then when the moment comes, when you get an email and you feel like you need to respond immediately, and the internet goes down, you know what? 50 years ago, there was no internet, at least none that any of us had access to. Probably be okay if the internet response doesn't go out for 15 minutes, 3 hours, 3 days, however long it takes for the internet to come back. The writer of Ecclesiastes says, you're not in control. You don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. That there's a time for everything in life. And some of them sound really good. A lot of times in this list, I would really like the first half. Works perfectly. A time to dance, a time to throw some stones, a time to live, a time to be at peace. The other ones don't sound so good. The opposites don't sound so good, but that's just life. So rolling with that, trusting that God will be with us in that, recognizing we're not in control, but we trust in a God who will never abandon us on that journey of craziness, can carry us through. So in the little things in your life, start practicing letting go. I wanted the last muffin. Let it go. I wanted the strawberry donut from Sugar Shack. Let it go. Or go back to Sugar Shack and get another one. I don't know, but let it go. And then when the big things roll over you, it's not going to be easy, but you can roll with that punch. Did you all start walking as soon as you jumped out of the womb? No. Did any of you start crawling as soon as you came out the womb? I doubt it. Some of us. But probably not. Take small steps. Move in small places. Find space in your life for the God who loves you. Practice that presence. So when you need that presence the most, it's not like it's the first time you've ever done it. So you can listen and hear God in the transitional moments. Over the last several years, it was 2 years ago that almost 2 years ago that we decided, it was over 2 years ago that we decided to say maybe we'd like to leverage what we have here so that we can move to another physical location. So a little over 2 years ago, we met with you all as a congregation. We talked about it. We signed a contract, and we signed a contract to sell the building. We didn't sign a contract to sell the building. We signed a contract with the realtors. And then in the fall of that year, somebody bought it. But then they said, we're going to study you for 2.5 years. This has been the most bizarre transition in my life. From week to week, I never knew what was happening. Some people were really mad with me. I can deal with that. Half the time people are mad with me. My dog is mad with me half the time. No, actually, Reedy's never mad with me. I can't figure that out. But In the last 2 years, what I've learned is that even when life is crazy and uncertain and you don't know what the next step is and when the building's going to sell or if the building's going to sell, and when someone asks you, one day you're feeling up and you say, oh yeah, I'm sure it's going to all work out. And the next day they ask you the same question. It's like, I don't think it's ever going to work out. It's just going to fall apart. I'm sure. In the midst of the chaos and uncertainty of those transitions, those are the moments you learn to trust God. I have learned in the last 2 years a lesson I learned in my 20s. And that lesson in the 20s was when my first marriage collapsed. And I thought God owed me. Dude, I worked for you. You're supposed to be on my side. And it still fell apart. And I learned to trust God in the next couple of years in a way I had never trusted before. The last 2 years has been just such an exercise for me. Trusting that God is in all of this. You know, as Mark pointed out to me last week, he said to me, when you talked about the transition that St. James may be making and when it will be making it, and you talked about how it seemed like a good idea 2 years ago, but you never said that other piece. It's still a good idea. We're going to trust God in the midst of the craziness of our transition. We don't know when everything will happen. But then again, isn't that life? You don't know when everything's going to happen. As much as you'd like to schedule your life to the moment, you don't know when it's going to happen. But you know what you do know? I hope you're learning to know and to trust that no matter what happens, God is there. God is always with you and with me. So there's a time for everything. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. But in the end, God uses it all because God is present with us in it all. And God loves us in it all. And God will walk with us in it all. There is a season for everything and a time for every purpose under heaven. Read Ecclesiastes this week. If you can't bring yourself to read Ecclesiastes this week, or certainly chapter 3, then use the Google and search for the song, Turn, Turn, Turn. And listen to it. It has a little axe to grind about peace, but overall, it just is a reminder. Life changes all the time. Transitions happen all the time. You'll make it and practice God's presence in the little things, so when the big things happen, you'll be ready. Or as ready as you'll ever be, and you won't be. Give up the illusion of control.